Hello, it's Cynthia at Pretty Paper Blackbirds. Thanks so much for joining me for this video. Today's video is all about foiled backgrounds. I'm going to be combining some Deco Foil Transfer Gel with Spellbinders Glimmer Foil in a couple of different colors. Yes, you can use these two products together. I have a couple of different backgrounds here that I've created for the video, and I've made some cards. So I'm using some Transfer Gel Duo. This is a hot or cold application product. And then I also have Deco Foil Transfer Gel Blanco. And this is for use with a dark cardstock background, and it is a hot foil product only. So stay tuned, I'll show you how I made these cards. So I'm going to start with this Shaker birthday card. I'm using a layered stencil set from Pretty Pink Posh. This is the Party Hats layered stencil. Comes with 4 stencil layers. It was part of a larger release of all of these birthday or party themed sets. There's some ice cream, some layered cake, and a crepe banner stencil. These are all really cute. Any of these would work well for this application. I'm using a white background panel here, so I'm going to use the Transfer Gel Duo for this application. And the first thing I need to do with this 5x5 panel is tape down this first party hat outline layer, and I'm going to ink that up with some Gina K inks. I have Slate, Sea Glass, Tranquil Teal, and Turquoise Sea. And I'm just going to alternate applying the colors here with this domed foam applicator. I think this is from Ranger. And I'll fill in all of these outlines here, just alternating dark, medium, and light across this panel until I've filled in all of these. And I'm trying to give it a little bit more dimension by not just filling it in one-dimensionally. I'm leaving some lighter spaces. I'm filling in some darker spaces as I move across this panel. The outline layer is complete, so I'm going to move on to this pom-pom layer. This is the top of each of the party hats. So I'm using Gina K's Slate ink. And again, I'm trying to create a little bit of dimension here with one color by varying the amount of this ink that I'm applying to each area of the pom-pom. So this is all done. I'm going to hit this with the heat tool to make sure this is completely dry. This is a dye-based ink, but I want to make sure that it's dry before I start putting this transfer gel on so nothing runs or bleeds. So I can tape this stencil down. And again, I'm using the Transfer Gel Duo. And I'm going to apply this with a craft palette knife. You can get these on Amazon. A lot of the card makers sell them, but my trick here for applying this very evenly is to put just a small amount on your craft knife and start at the top, and you're going to hold this this craft spatula or craft palette knife at about a 30-degree angle, 15 to 30-degree angle. So you're applying, but you're also scraping as you're moving top to bottom. Try not to go side to side. You'll get really good application if you just go top to bottom. For the background for this next card, I'm using this Simon Says Stamp Zebra stencil from the Animal Print stencil set. It comes with 3 stencils. Any of these would work. I have a 6x6 black cardstock panel here, and I am going to tape this down. For this stencil, because it is a dark colored cardstock, I'm going to use the Transfer Gel Blanco. This is a white transfer gel that dries white, and I'll be using a white foil on top of this, so it's going to work really well with this white background. So I'm using the same process to apply this transfer gel. I'm using my craft knife, and I am just applying a small amount top to bottom, trying not to move side to side so this gel doesn't seep underneath any of these areas of the stencil. And I'm going back over, just making sure everything is as smooth as I can get it. For my next background, I'm using this Fizzy stencil by Gina K Designs. I have a 6x6 white card panel taped down here, and I'm going to use the Transfer Gel Duo for this card. You do want to make sure that you wipe off all the excess transfer gel from your palette knife and from your stencil before you take these to the sink to clean them up. And they do clean up very, very easily with just soap and warm water. So I have all three of my panels here, and here's my first tip. Let these panels dry overnight. So the transfer gel will tell you that you can use it within an hour for most applications, but I have found when using it with this Spellbinders Glimmer foil, it needs to dry at least 24 hours. So I've created this carrier package here just with some heavyweight vellum that I've taped together so that it is large enough to fit a 6x6 panel. I have my Amazon Basics laminator here. The light is green, so it's ready to go. It does have a 3 mil and a 5 mil setting. I use the 5 mil setting, so that's tip number 2. So I'm going to start with this glimmer foil in prism for this zebra background, and this transfer gel Blanco does not dry tacky at all. It's very slick and very smooth. So I'm just going to cover this. I'll cut enough glimmer foil here to cover the front of this panel with not a lot of excess. I do trim off the excess foil so that first of all, I'm not wasting, and then secondly, it does sometimes tend to stick to this vellum carrier package. So I'm inserting this with the folded side first. Make sure that the light is on your laminator. It tells you it's hot enough, and you can see that the application is just amazing. There is very little, if any, overfoiling here, so I don't have foil where I don't want it, and it just looks beautiful. So this works really well if you just follow a couple of basic steps. For this next background, I'm using the glimmer foil in rainbow. This is on the Gina K Fizzy stencil, and same process. This transfer gel duo does dry a little bit tackier. So when you're cutting and putting your foil down on that panel, just make sure that you have everything smoothed out as best you can. It will tend to grab the foil, and it may pull a little bit of that foil off as you're adding it to the top. So just make sure you have it exactly where you want it. And same process, feed it through the laminator with the folded side of the carrier package first. Make sure it's on 5 mil and your green light is on. And you can see this one foiled beautifully as well. For the party hat card, I'm using glimmer foil in holographic speckle. So I'm using the exact same process. Again, this is the transfer gel duo, so it does dry just a tiny bit tackier even after 24 hours. So I'm covering the entire panel in my foil. I'll run this through my laminator, and this card probably turned out the best of all three. There was no overfoiling. The foil took really well to the transfer gel, and this really was a beautiful result. I'll show you how I used these backgrounds for some cute birthday cards. So for this first card, I'm using the Spellbinders Topsy-Turvy Cake die, and there are lots of really fun pieces in this set. I'm only going to use the layered cake dies, and I chose some colored cardstock that had sort of a safari theme. And you can see here on my test card, I have several different layers of cake here. So I've cut the cake part out of just layering weight wide cardstock. I'm using this Karen Burniston Safari Animals die set that I picked up on scrapbook.com, and I'm going to start by die cutting all of my elements. Okay, I have everything die cut, and I'll show you what I mean by the layers on this Topsy-Turvy Cake die set. So you have an outline piece, and you have this little inset piece that has some geometric shapes cut out of each one. So for the white layer, I combine these, tape it down to my white cardstock, and cut the white layer. And then for the background colored layer, I just use that outline piece. I'm going to start by gluing each of these front panels to the colored background that corresponds with each cake layer. And I also have some Copic markers here that I'm going to use to give some color and some shading to my little safari animals. I'm also using this Copic multi-liner. It is a waterproof black liner and it is a 0.3. This is going to be a top fold A2 card, so I'm going to trim this background panel down just a little bit. I want about 1/8 of an inch showing on each side of the panel, so I've trimmed this down and I'm just going to use some strong liquid adhesive to adhere this to the front of my card base. Once that's dry, I can start to lay out my cake layers and glue those together. I'm not going to glue those down to this front panel yet. I do want my safari animals to kind of peek out from each side of this layer cake. So I'm going to wait until everything is composed and glued together, and then I will glue that down to the card base as the last step. The front of my card needs a little bit of dimension, so I'm going to use some foam tape to pop up my topsy-turvy cake here just a little bit on the front panel. I'm going to leave the backing strips on the back of my foam tape for now. I want to spend just a few minutes composing the front of this card. So I'll get all these little safari animals positioned exactly where I want them, and then I can glue those down to the front of this cake layer and to my background layer, and then I am ready to position my cake layer. This animal print background stencil and the Safari Animals die set are really versatile. I can think of several different applications for these sets, and having the ability to use a stencil with glimmer foil just really increases the usefulness of your stencils, and you can also use up some of that glimmer foil. I know I have quite a bit of glimmer foil in my stash right now. So this card is complete. I am going to save this little space here on the front to add a die cut number for maybe a second birthday card for my granddaughter. So I'm going to follow the same process for this next card. I am going to create a 5x5 shaker card. So I'm going to start by trimming down this front foiled panel, and I want to leave this row of party hats here over on the right hand side because I'm going to fussy cut a couple of those little party hats to embellish the front of my card. So the rest of this panel, I'll trim it down to 5x5, and that's just going to be a couple of little snips off of each side. So this is going to be the background on the inside of the window of my shaker. I have these Momenta square nesting dies, and I've marked the two that I need here. The largest is the 5-inch square, and then the one right inside of that is 4 3/4 inches. So it is the, I think it's 2 sizes down from the 5-inch. So I'm going to tape these down to a piece of heavyweight white cardstock, and I have my centering ruler here, and I'm just making sure that I have these completely lined up and I have the same amount of space on each side. If you don't have one of these centering rulers, this is from Tim Holtz Ideology. It is so helpful. I use this for a lot of cards where I'm doing die cutting just like this. So I have my 5x5 window cut out here, and I also have a piece of 5x5 acetate. So I'm going to use score tape to adhere my acetate to this window panel. I'm going to make sure that I adhere this score tape along the inside edge of the shaker window opening. This will keep my shaker bits from getting stuck all around the edges of the window. Now I can remove the backing from the score tape, and before I adhere this acetate piece, I'm going to wipe it down really, really well with a microfiber cloth and a dryer sheet so I can remove any dust or static. Okay, I'm ready to start building up the walls on my shaker card. So I'm using 1/2 inch foam tape here. I'm going to attach this around the entire outside of this window piece, and then I will remove the foam backing and add a second layer. You can also use that same configuration of larger and smaller dies and cut that window opening from a piece of white craft foam. This is my binder of embellishments and shaker bits, and I think for this card I'm going to go with a blue and silver holographic or mirrored embellishment for my shakers. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this protective backing from my foam tape, and I didn't show this part, but I did go over it one more time with my my dryer sheet, and now I can just start to add some shaker bits to the inside of this window. I'm going to add a little bit of liquid adhesive to this foam tape. This will give me a few seconds to be able to maneuver this card base. If I don't get it on straight the very first time, I'll be able to shift it around just a little bit to get it squared up. And this one actually went on really well. So the actual card base here is complete, and I'm going to move on to fussy cutting those little party hats. I actually spared you having to watch me fussy cut. I don't like fussy cutting. I'm going to use this Pretty Pink Posh birthday script sentiments, and I use this quite a bit. It has both a stamp and a die for these greetings and sentiments. It's one of my favorite sets. I do use it quite a bit. So I am going to stamp this on some Hero Arts Arctic cardstock, and I am using my anti-static powder tool because I am going to use a detail silver embossing powder to emboss these. So I am going to ink this up with Versamark ink. I'm going to ink it up twice. I think my ink pad is maybe needing to be re-inked here, but it actually turned out really well. I'm going to hit this with the heat tool, and you can see that it actually stamped and embossed really, really well. So I'm going to tape these dies down. I will run these through the die cut machine. This will be the top layer, and then I'm going to run it through one more time and create that white layer so that I can give these a little bit of dimension and build them up in 2 layers. I'm using foam squares to adhere my greeting to the front of my card. I like using score tape and little foam squares when I'm working with acetate. They do hold really, really well, sticks immediately, unlike glue where you have to give it quite a bit of time to dry, and it does, I think sometimes with liquid adhesive, it does tend to pop off. So I am just positioning these on the front of my card, and the only thing left to do is adhere these little birthday party hats, and this card is complete. This is another card that is really versatile. I'm going to keep this in my stash because I can use this card for a younger person, an older person, so I'll pull that out later on this year when I need it. This next card is also a top fold A2 card, so I'm going to trim down my foiled background to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I have some stitched star dies here, and I'm going to line these up in sort of a falling star configuration for the front of the card. I have a piece of white craft foam here and just a white layering weight sheet of cardstock that I've cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. Same size as my front panel here. And I'm going to line up these stitched stars on my white panel, and then I am going to sandwich these two together and run this through my die cut machine. So it should cut through both layers, both the white panel and my craft foam. If it doesn't, it will at least leave an impression on my craft foam, and I'll have a very easy way to line up those stitched star dies in order to cut that exact same configuration in my craft foam. So you can see it did cut through both layers perfectly. Everything lines up. So I am going to go ahead and stamp my greeting on the front of this card. I'm using the Spellbinders Magic Sentiment stamp set, and I'm going to use the stamp Wish Upon a Star. So I'm going to stamp this up in my MISTI, and I am going to stamp this in VersaFine Clair, and then I'm going to go back and stamp it again once it's dry with Versamark embossing ink, and I am going to use some clear embossing powder to really make that greeting stand out. I do this a lot with my cards. Sometimes just embossing in black powder, it just doesn't give the same effect as doing this sort of a 2-layer technique. So if you haven't tried that with your cards, definitely with this Nocturne ink, the VersaFine Clair Nocturne, it is a fabulous, fabulous black ink. Sorry, I'm flicking there. I always hear Tim Holtz in my head saying, don't be a flicker when I do that. But okay, I have a top fold A2 card base here. I have scored it at 5 1/2, and just going to give that a little bit of a burnish, and I am ready to start assembling all of the layers for this card front. So I'm going to start by just gluing down this foiled layer, and I always try to line everything up from the top when I'm doing a top fold card like this. So if I have to trim anything off, I'm always trimming off at the bottom of the card, not at the top of the card where it folds. So as I'm working with this craft foam layer, I'm making sure that I get an ample amount of glue on this layer. Craft foam can shift around. It's a little bit tricky to use when you are gluing it to paper on each side. So I'm just making sure that everything lines up. The great thing is you get a little bit more time when you're gluing with foam because it does slip around a little bit more. I really like how this card turned out. It's another really versatile card, mostly just because of these backgrounds. I love foiled backgrounds. I love being able to have some cards that I can pull out of my stash that I can use for lots of different people for birthdays. Here are all 3 completed cards from today's video. I really love having the ability to use what is in my stash. I think having a great way to combine the Deco Foil Transfer Gels with the Spellbinders Glimmer Foil just gives you another great option to do that. Here's another card that is up on my blog. This is using the Spellbinders Pick Your Greeting slider die set, and the background is also from Spellbinders. It's a stencil called On the Dot. So all of the information to make this card, materials, how to, is up on my blog as well. Thank you so much for tuning in for this video. I hope you found some informative, useful information. And as always, thank you so much to all of my subscribers. I really appreciate you. I'm starting to build my channel and build my blog, and it's really just so exciting. Thanks for joining me. I hope to see you in the next video.